Good morning. I have 4 topics to discuss. One is about images, and I will quote some numbers about the images. The other part is 4K and aliasing. Then I'll discuss something about color gamut. Basically, that my statement will be that the present today broadcast camera can already extend outside 709, not completely 2020, but somewhere in between. And finally, I will end with HDR, the experiments we did with high dynamic range. Well, Charles, I think you're going to like this. If you go for a camera, 2000 lux, 90% reflection, color temperature 3200 and f11, if we call that 100%, if at the same time you say that that's also your master gain setting at 0 dB, then you get 3000 photons in green, about 3000 in red, and in blue 1100. With 60% quantum efficiency, you get something like 1800 electrons in green, slightly less than 700 in blue, and 1900 in red. And everybody here in the room have seen images under these conditions, and they love it. And yes, there's shot noise on it. And the shot noise is just the root out of this number. But that's that high number you get when you go to the 100%. People even use such a camera at 6 dB or plus 12 dB. And if you look at the numbers in green, you have 450 electrons. Blue, 170 electrons. And yes, at plus 12 dB, you'll see some noise. I don't think it's to be that bad. And still you have very pleasing images. Another gimmick, a pixel. A photon falls onto a pixel and generates an electron-hole pair. Electron length is left behind. In essence, electrons are captured in the pixel. But there are no half electrons, no quarter electrons. There are just 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 electrons. A pixel is just an electron, is an electron counter, is a quantizer, in steps of 1. And an A to D converter, you call it an LSB, is also steps of 1. 1, 2, 3, 4. So basically, if you know the maximum amount of charge a pixel can contain, and you take the 2 log out of it, then that's the maximum number of bits you need for your A to D converter. Now take, for example, that 5 micron pixel. Assume a Qmax of 15 kilo electronen. It sounds funny that you count electrons, but that's the world of the images. You talk in electrons. So 15,000 electrons, and that means that 14-bit is enough. Can't you use then a 16-bit A to D converter? But of course. But the only thing that will happen is you will measure the read noise more accurately. And that won't help you. It will show perfectly in a folder or in a leaflet. But this is how the world looks like. The last element of numbers related to images. If you look to this is a graph showing read noise divided by quantum efficiency. So it's read noise divided by sensitivity, divided by the bandwidth. And then you have a figure of merit. And you could call it's the number of photons per unit of bandwidth. And if you take not the hertz but the megahertz, then you get numbers which are pleasant. You can see that from the first dot is our CCD camera, of course, 1987, introduced at NEB. There it was about 200. All the dots are cameras, either Sony, Panasonic, Philips, Grass Valley. And the last dot is the CMOS imager. And you see that from 1987 till now, we improved 100. We improved 40 dB in intrinsic performance of noise and sensitivity. That's huge. Oh, sorry, still another element. A distinction between a CCD and a CMOS imager. A CCD has 1 or 2 outputs, and If it has to run at HDTV, 1920, 1080p 60, by the way, usually the swing you get out of your pixel is about 1 volt. And in CCD you have to process that on a 7 to 14 nanoscale scale. The CMOS imager has a processing below each column. That means he has a full line time, the time to do the processing. That is 16 microseconds. The difference between the CCD and the CMOS imager is a factor of 1,000 in timing. And that helps. That's why high frame rate is so much easier with the CMOS imager. The read noise can intrinsically be lower in the CMOS imager because you have 16 microseconds the time to average the noise instead of the 7 nanosecond you had in the CCD. Because of that 16 microsecond, coupling with the 1 volt swing, your sharpness will be better. At least not for the small signal, they will be comparable, but large swings, CMOS is better. And last but not least, HDR, high dynamic range, can be done too, but that's in the pixel. Now 4K. Why did we choose for 2/3 inch? First of all, we are in the sports world. We're not in drama, we're not in static images, it's movement. And we wanted to use the before mount because all our customers still have lenses with a before mount. And they're 100 times zoom lenses. And they still want to use that. By the way, the problem of 100 times zoom lens is, of course, that you won't have, not near in the future, any 4K performance. But unfortunately, that's the way the optics is. 4K in 2/3 inch, it means you have the same sensitivity, same f number. It means same, not shallow, but large depth of field. You can do your chromatic aberration correction. By the way, what we did was intended for sport, not for drama. So you have to choose. We used the 5 micron optimized pixel, and that enabled high dynamic range, high frame rate. The camera normally is in HD mode 422. In 4K we do 444. And Mark called it up conversion, and I say we do the same thing as a single imager camera does, and that's debayering, except they have a more fancy name than we have. Resolution. Resolution is a combination of MTF, the modulation transfer function, and aliasing. The MTF itself is determined by the pixel aperture, the pixel width. Together, of course, with the MTF of the lens, whether or not there's an optical low-pass filter, and maybe other limiting elements. So if you only know the pixel, you can already calculate the MTF. Aliasing. Aliasing is only defined by the sample grid, the distance between the points of gravity of the pixel. Half pixel offset does not change MTF in itself. What it does is it will reduce aliasing, and because of that, one can electronically enhance MTF without enhancing aliasing. It effectively doubles the sample frequency. Suppression of aliasing. There is no Nyquist filtering possible in imaging. There is no such thing as an optical brick wall filter. As an engineer, you only have access to a cosine, an optical low-pass filter. That's just a cosine or a couple of cosines, and that's it. Nyquist will always be violated. And aliasing, when it aliases to low frequencies, and that will happen when the optical low-pass filter is not positioned at a good frequency, low frequencies are very, very visible because of the CFF function. The closest one can get to have 0 MTF is to have 0 MTF at the sample frequency, or have aliasing cancel out through half pixel offset. Here I show the solid line is the brick wall filter. The dotted line is how an optical low-pass filter looks like. And the red arrow is the sample frequency, the first aliasing, the sample frequency. And here you see that the optical low-pass filter has a notch, a 0 MTF at the sample frequency. Now let's take a lens at f4, an optical low-pass filter with a notch at 200 line pairs per millimeter, and pixel aperture of 5 micrometer. Imagine now that you have on one hand a single imager, large format, you know, the 4K, with a pixel of 5 micrometer, and on the other hand you have the 2/13 camera with 3 images and also a 5 micron pixel. Then in line pairs per millimeter, the MTF is the same for both images. Now we go to the imager basically is a two-dimensional sampler. I just take the horizontal direction. In the 3-imager camera, you have a pixel grid. The pixels are co-sighted. The pixel width is 5 micron, and the pitch is 5 micron too. Pixel pitch 5 micrometer means that you have a sample frequency of 1000 over 5, and that's the 200 line pairs per millimeter you see on the right. The solid line again is that MTF I showed you of the system, and the dotted line is the first aliasing. Second is the pixel grid in a 1-imager camera. You have the same width of the pixel, and you have a pixel pitch of 10 micrometer. The pixels in between are from a different color and do not belong to the pixel you're looking at. As a consequence, your sample frequency is not 200 line pairs per millimeter, but 100 line pairs per millimeter. And I show you here the first aliasing and the second aliasing. The first aliasing is at 100 line pairs per millimeter, and if you follow the dot dash curve, you see that at 0 Hertz there's still 40% left of output. As for the second aliasing at 200 line pairs, in both cases it is 0 at 0 line pairs per millimeter. This aliasing is hardly visible. This aliasing is very visible, 40% at low frequencies. But line pairs per millimeter is not fair. You have to use the numbers which really represent what you want to talk about. It won't be TV lines, because TV lines is sensitive for whether you have a 4:3 or a 16:9 aspect ratio. So it's better to use CPPY, that means cycles per picture width. It's just a matter of quoting a frequency. In 2/3, 2000 cycles per picture width is equivalent with 200 line pairs per millimeter. And for the Bayet one, the 200 line pairs is equivalent with 400 cycles per picture width. So on the left side, what you see is, because there's only a low-pass filter at let's call it the 4K sampling frequency, you have an aliasing, a heavy colored aliasing at low frequencies. I could have chosen an optical low-pass filter, but then it really would have been only HDR, because then I had to make a notch at the 2000 cycles per picture width too. And you wouldn't have aliasing, but it would be just as what we do. And on the right side you see the 3-imager camera with 0 aliasing at 0 cycles per picture width. This is how it looks like. Single imager. You see that at the, let's say at the 4000 cycles per picture width, the aliasing is hardly visible, but at the 2000 it is very visible. And this is what you do when you have a good conditioned camera with optical low-pass filters, but with the problems we quoted. Now I have to move over to wide gamut. Is there a wide gamut broadcast camera? Basically what you do in the camera is you have matrixing. That means that you choose your primary 709 or 2020, and your matrix is such that your color errors are as small as possible. If you do the math, then in the end it's like this. Either you do matching against 709, and that means that you get your triangle 709. You won't get anything outside 709. The main reason is the matrix coefficients have negative numbers. But a camera always has a black limiter in it, And because of the black limiter and the negative numbers, it's always confined to 709. On the other hand, if I would match again 2020 primaries, then a broadcast camera will have an extended color gamut. It won't occupy 2020, but at least it will be somewhere between 2020 and 709. Now we come to the fun topic, HDR. This was the very first image we did with our CMOS imager. And if only it was black and white, we would have had it already in the camera. No problem at all. What is the problem? If you measure the transfer curve of light on the imager and signal out, then this is how it looks like. By the way, it's a linear logarithmic scale. Even though the first part, the left part of the curve is curved, but in reality it's plain linear, but that's because of the lin log scale. But what you can clearly see is that there's just a slope for the red, the green, and the blue traces, which represent the red, green, and the blue output. And it's a straight line, so that means the response is logarithmic. And it's logarithmic because you make use of a law, just a physical law, just like photon shot noise is a physical law, and it's called the subthreshold region. This measurement went up to 10 million candelas per square meter, and that's where we stopped the measurement. But what you see here in the graph is you have that linear part, and then it goes into logarithmic. And that point where it switches from one region to the other, that's really the problematic part. Problematic because you like to have a color fidelity. That means that in the linear part you have your white point and you want to keep it like that. But that's the same for the logarithmic part. You want to have your colors be faithful just as a linear. And that was very, and still is very tough to do. By the way, last Monday I was in Poynton's seminar, and he gave me an idea which I didn't realize, and that is, if you look at 1% steps, that means you need 70 levels per f-stop. F-stop is 60 dB, that means basically you need 12 levels per dB. But I can also calculate how many levels per dB I have in that logarithmic part. I was also always from the impression that the number of levels was too small to be usable. And to my surprise, it's about 6 LSB per dB. So yes, it's not what it should be, but it's only 2%. So maybe it's workable. And that's, I'm from a broadcast world, so what you extend usually needs to be linear. And as I said, the biggest hurdle is the inflection point where you go from linear to logarithmic. So that means maintaining your white point even when crossing the barrier. This is normal exposure. The camera put in high dynamic range mode is the right upper part. The left is just standard dynamic range. Now, if you open up the lens, then still the high dynamic range image you can see in the gamma chart. You see all the patches, the gray patches is still visible, where in the SDR image is almost washed out. That brings me to the next part, and that is the HDR range in the imager is huge, somewhere between 120 or 160 dB. Mapping in 10-bit SDI with 12 levels per dB means that you can cover 85 dB, and that's not enough. If you would allow the 2% steps, you can cover about 170 dB in that 10-bit domain. Then came along Dolby with their PQ curve. And they showed that with 10-bit, you still can make good HDR images. So what we did, with the LD mix, we mapped up to 20 times and stayed in the linear part, preventing the white point shift. And that made it, for the first time, workable to a huge extended dynamic range. So we put, let's say, a kind of inverse curve in the camera. Look at we put again the same tungsten light bulb of 500 watt or 200 watt. And then even if you open up the lens from f11 to f4 to f1.8, even in f1.8, you see the gray patches of the gamma chart. And then we did some trials. The first one was in Zurich, the European Athletic Championships. The most surprising question for us when they were organizing it is, but how much time do you need for post-processing? And we said, guys, it's live. What we do is live. So that means we record it and then it's over. We're done. It's live. And it worked very well. By the way, you can see some footage of the Zurich trial in the next room. The other part was MotoGP in Valencia, somewhere in October, I guess. The test is under difficult circumstances. It's a low sun, there are shades, there are darks. The camera system we used, an experimental, had two outputs simultaneously. The standard dynamic range and the high dynamic range output. And what was very noticeable is that there are a huge amount of cameras that needs to be shaded. Those cameras, which were standard dynamic range, let's say 709, the shaders almost stopped working because they couldn't cover all the things that needed to be done. And the camera with the high dynamic range output, the shader almost didn't have to do a thing. Noticeable was the fact that the quality of the images were very unsensitive to the F number. It didn't matter whether you have F2, F4, F5, 6, where I can guarantee you that range you can never occupy in the standard definition. It will somewhere clip, it will remove details in the image. That really was a surprise. It also told me that there are some people discussing, well, we have Rec 709, we have a knee, and we do reversible mapping, or we do a mapping into HDR. I can tell you that will only work if you exactly know what the knee setting is, and it will only work when the knee is not used as a clipper, as a limiter. But often the knee is used as a limiter and not as a knee should be used. So that won't work. By the way, Dolby supplied the monitors during the trials and for debugging. I think I forgot to mention that if you stay in the high dynamic range mode, then it's always reversible. No matter what you have, you can always convert it into 7 and 9, but not the other way around. So here's a block diagram. On the left side, you see the camera we used, put on a plateau close to where the motors were cycling. Here people were looking at the quality of the HDR and the standard dynamic range. And this is what I told about the shader. You see in the middle there's a shader. That's how it looks like. But then, are there then no problems? Yes, of course. Because it was the first time. You need to know which levels do you have to use. And we decided that the best images you got, if you define 100%, you know the 100% we know from just Rec 709, the standard camera, as code level 512. And that's, Sugawara-san, that's 100 nits. And that's what you wanted, isn't it? So 100 nits is what 100% should be, and then you get best quality images. Black level, well, black level is a more tedious thing. It's a trial and error. It's mainly because if you look at the inverse curve, then for small values you have a huge differential gain. You know, in the gamma of 709, it's either limited to 4 or 4.5, and the BBC sometimes asks, well, can't I get 5 or can I get 10 times? But then a fixed gain in the small signal part. But in this case, we didn't do that, so you can go up to 50 times or 100 times differential gain. And that means that it will blow up the noise. No problem. So that's the part that needs some tweaking. But on the other hand, I think we are very satisfied with the images we got from the trials in Zurich, and I think especially MotoGP. Now is the question, but how do you proceed? My engineering take would be, well, we did 3D, it didn't fly, but 3D means that you have at least parts of your studio equipped to handle left eye, right eye. So 2 streams at the same time, timed at the same time. So why do not use it for HDR and SDR feeds? And as I explained, you only have to shade the SDR and take HDR, giving the proper settings for the black and the 100%, just as it is. In conclusion, in a single image of 4K camera, there is additional colored aliasing at 2K cycles per pixel width. With a proper matrix, one can reach a chromaticity triangle which lays between the 709 and the 2020. The standard dynamic range channel with gamma and E can give situations where there is no inverse transform possible because of flash dark colors. With mapping for 2084, one can always derive an SDR feed afterwards. The first live trials with the dual output worked very well, and a dynamic range of 20 times linear was established. The quality of the images, which are tonal mapped for 2084, are rather insensitive for F-number setting. The shader can handle many cameras under difficult situations with ease. Want to see more? Look at Delby's in the exhibition next door. Thank you for your attention.